Hi, I'm Milena, a booktuber, bookstore owner, classics lover, and today I want to talk to you about the books I read in March, my current reads, and my TBR for April. If you've watched any of my recent videos, then you know that I'm working my way through both a fiction and a non-fiction women's prize, which has made up the majority of my reads of March. Let me check that I got it right. On the non-fiction list, I read The Peep Show, What a Wild Sea Can Be, and Private Revolutions. I also read Embers of the Hands, which two of those have made it on a short list. From the fiction list, I've read Nesting, The Persians, and Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout. I will leave a card up here for those videos where I talk about those books if you're curious. Also want to talk about the 3 books that I have read that are not discussed in those videos. So the first thing I want to discuss is that I finally finished the whole trilogy of Kristin Lavrensdatter by Sigrid Undset. This is hard to describe because I cannot really talk about the third book because this is 3 books and I read 1 book every month this winter, which was my goal, and I actually managed it. It is somehow surprising to me because I really don't do well with big books, but I guess it helped that this is a trilogy. It's almost as long as War and Peace, which I read during the same time last year, and I can say that I enjoyed this so much more than War and Peace. Kristin Lavrensdatter is a historical fiction written in the 1920s, but it's set in the 14th century in Norway. And this edition, so the Penguin editions, I think you have the deluxe edition, but you also have the normal black spine edition, and then it is published per book. Have the new translation, and apparently I read the introduction. It is a big improvement on the older translation because it's much more true to the lyrical side of Norwegian instead of more matter-of-fact tone that the first translation had. So we follow Kristin throughout her life, and of course because we follow her throughout 3 books, it's like Kristin's whole life, which I found amazing. Kind of, yeah, it's very epic. Like this book, it's about daily life, but it's so well set in the 14th century in Norway. I really felt like I was in that period, and I know that there's probably not a lot known about that period in time because I don't think writing is a very big part of culture here. There are letters written, but it's like a really big deal, and people only write letters when it's really important. I think most of the characters in this book don't know necessarily how to write. I don't think the children are necessarily taught how to write unless they have an interest in the church and they maybe want to become a monk, and then they need to know Latin, of course. So I really appreciated how realistic the historical setting in this book was, which was one of my favorite things. I just really enjoyed following Kristin and her family throughout such a chunk of time in a setting that I knew so little about. Overall, I gave this series a 4.5 stars. I would highly recommend it. Definitely take your time with it like I did. I read book 1 in January, book 2 in February, and book 3 in March. But yeah, I would highly recommend reading this if it sounds like at all interesting to you. I will give a little bit of a warning that religion is especially, I think, in book 2 really big part, which I didn't mind. I found it very fitting for the story and the setting, but if that is something that you truly don't enjoy in books, then maybe this isn't for you. I won't say much more about this book because again, I've talked about it quite a lot about book 1 and 2, and book 3 is just something you cannot discuss without spoiling previous books. So yeah, I'm very happy I finished it, and it's the epic of the winter. Then a book I just finished because I have a live show for tomorrow is Julia by Sandra Newman, and this is a play on 1984 by George Orwell, in which in Orwell's story you follow a male main character who discovers the dictatorship of Big Brother, or discovers, I think, what is possible beyond that dictatorship of Big Brother. And Big Brother is like, it feels like an AI system with television screens that is constantly watching you. Like Big Brother is watching you is like a famous phrase, and it's set in 1984, and Orwell wrote it in the 40s or 50s. I don't really remember, but this is recently published, and this is from the perspective of that character's girlfriend called Julia. I find this difficult to talk about because so many of the concepts in this book are Orwell's. It's definitely an adaptation, and it's very clearly an adaptation because like the title is on the cover. It's not like Sandra Newman stole from Earl or anything like that. She very much wrote an adaptation. She did give it a modern twist because of the way that we write sci-fi right now. We need more explanation of a world, of a setting. There was so much world building done in this book that you don't see in 1984 by George Orwell. I have to say it's been like, I think 2 years since I read 1984. I didn't really love 1984. I found it, especially the second half, quite boring. and was a bit of a push through for me. This book wasn't boring at all. I flew through it. I thought Julia was really interesting, and I vaguely remember 1984 because the character from 1984 is in this book as well, of course, because they have a romantic relationship. I just found the exploration of what it mentally does to you, such a dictatorship, such brainwashing, I found very interesting, and the world is way more explored in daily life, and we see that actually the character from 1984 in Newman's world is quite a privileged figure compared to a lot of other people like Julia. I'm not really sure what to make of it because I have a hard time distinguishing what is Orwell and what is Sandra Newman. I'm curious to see where the live show is going to go. I'm very excited to hear other people talk about it, mostly just to listen. Newman also had kind of her own ideas on what a dictatorship and brainwashing does, especially towards the ending, which I'm really excited to discuss in our spoilery live show. But yeah, I think it is about a 4-star for me. This could definitely be a 5-star, but I am just not a dystopian person. I never really enjoy dystopian stories. Because it's a dystopian, I don't think it could ever be a 5-star. That's just not what I usually enjoy. But this was very clever. It made me think. I liked it better than 1984. It's also easier to like because the writing is much easier to get along with, to be honest. And again, it doesn't have the misogyny that 1984 does, which I found annoying. And this book, I guess, is written because of the misogyny in 1984. I did really enjoy this one. And then another one that was actually very surprising to me. This was my audiobook of the month that I listened to before going to bed, and that is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. I would say this is like the OG romantasy. It is based on Slavic myth that I don't know, so I don't know how true it is, but it's about a man called a dragon. He's a magician and he lives in this town, in the tower, and in the town he picks a girl every 10 years to live with him. So I first thought it was kind of Beauty and the Beast, but apparently it's based on a different Slavic myth. The fantasy but also the horror element, which I didn't expect to be in here, but it was, is very based on the environment, on nature, on humans' relationship with nature, which I really loved. And I also loved the more romantasy part of this book. The writing is very slow, but that worked for me. It felt slow in the way that like Juliette Marillier is slow. I think if you're a Juliette Marillier fan, you will also enjoy this book. There was a more political storyline, especially towards the middle of the book, that I found quite boring, but I don't enjoy political fantasies. I'd rather just read like contemporary political books. I find it quite boring because it's always so oversimplified and simplistic in fantasy. I found it very unnecessary. It didn't work for me. So I think, did I give it a 4? Yeah, I gave it a 4-star. For a book from 2015, I feel like it really hits those romantasy vibes really well without it taking over the fantasy or the kind of fairy tale element. This felt very fairy tale-esque as well. And there's another book by Naomi Novik called Spinning Silver, which I'm really interested in because I love the story of Rumpelstiltskin. Right, and then we should probably talk about my current reads. There's still a few days left before the end of March, and I do always have my monthly romance, and I wouldn't call Uprooted a romance. I started listening to a Regency romance called The Earl Meets His Match. I think it's called Gentleman's Gentleman as well. It has 2 different titles depending on if you're reading the UK or the US edition. I don't know which one I have because I'm not in the UK or the US, but this is the one that my audiobook provider had. So this is about a man who is, he's an earl, but he lives quite secluded. He has quite a close relationship to his servants and he lives in his manor. There's a clause in his inheritance, because of course there is, that he needs to marry before the age of 25. And of course he's almost turning 25. So his plan is to go to the London season to find a wife, but in order to do so he needs to appear more conventional. For reasons you will discover later, he doesn't have a footman, or wait, no, not a footman. Someone who dresses him. What's it called? Oh gosh, I forgot. Well, the person, his personal servant. So he hires someone, a man, who will be his personal servant. But there's kind of some sparks between them because this is a queer Regency romance. I am not blown away by it so far. I think I'm a third of the way through. I of course like the characters and it's gonna be a bit of an original spin on a Regency romance, but neither the audiobook narrator nor the writing is really blowing me away. But I don't really need that from a romance. I just want to be entertained. So if the story does fun things, I'm sure this will be a great one, but it's definitely not really 5-star material. Talking about what is 5-star material, It's another book about, I thought it was another ocean fish book, but it's not really about fish at all. It is Why Fish Don't Exist. This is about a woman. This is kind of part memoir a little bit. I wouldn't really say it's a memoir, but she uses memoir elements to discover a scientist that she is very fascinated by. And there's a certain, I think, link between the way that she has experienced her growing up and the way that she was raised with that scientist, but the more she gets to know the scientist, the more controversy boils up. I don't really want to talk too much about this book because the book takes you along with the discovery of this scientist, which I'm finding fascinating. I'm a little over halfway through right now and I am stuck to my seat. It is the fact that I needed to read Julia, otherwise I would have finished this already. That's another one on the Women's Prize long list for nonfiction. It's not on the short list. To me it's a little bit surprising because I find it way better than the other books I've read that are on the shortlist so far. But of course, that's my personal opinion. I have decided to slightly ignore the shortlist and just go with what I want to read. There are 2 books on the shortlist though. We'll get to the TBR part in a little bit. But those 2 books I might still read. And then another book that I started last night is Crooked Seeds by Karen Jennings. Although I think it's Karen Jennings. She's a South African author. We meet Deidre in this book, who is living in South Africa during a drought and they need to get water from a van. There's a big water shortage, which is disgustingly described in the first chapter. The way that affects a human being not having enough water. Not great, but I think it's a great setup for a realistic, gritty novel. And I am enjoying it because Deidre seems to be so incredibly unconventional on different levels that I think this will be a great one. And someone sent me a message on Instagram that this is their favorite of the Women's Prize long list. I've only read 25 pages, but I think I will like this one. Right, let's head over to the TBR part for April. As I was getting ready to film the TBR portion of this video, the physical copy of Why Fish Don't Exist arrived. This is a different cover than I thought I would get, but I kind of like the foiling, although I really do love the other cover. Reading this on my phone through my audiobook app, and now I can switch over to this book, and because I'm liking it so much I don't mind having ordered the physical copy. But I just want to show you the beauty of a non-fiction with illustrations. I am not quite sure who illustrated this book, if this is like from the scientist himself, but I also really love the way the letters start. No, illustrations by Kate Samworth. So wow, they make beautiful illustrations. For the Buzzwordathon in March, the title prompt was to read a book with the word thing in it, and I read Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout, which was a book I really enjoyed. And the cover prompt was to read a book with a book on it, and Uprooted by Naomi Novik had a little book, and flying books as well, because it's a fantasy magical, which was, by the way, the reason I picked that one as an audiobook, because it fitted the prompt. Let's start with the fiction list that I have planned for myself. So I know that in April I think we get to know the shortlist of the Women's Prize for Fiction, so I've kind of picked a few that I think might not make it on the shortlist, so I will read it beforehand. The first one is Fundamentally. I've heard mixed things about this. It's a bit of a comedy, which I don't often think makes it to the shortlist. And then I also want to read A Little Trickery. I also feel like usually historical fictions don't necessarily make it, but I love the cover of this one. And then the book that I've heard almost no one about, and there's also only one kind of cover and only the paperback edition available, and that is Somewhere Else. I think this is also historical fiction, probably Second World War. It's set in Scotland. I think maybe this one will make it to the shortlist though, because I've heard so many good reviews, and that is Ama. I just want to read it because I'm really excited for it, but it's another one I hope to read in April. And then I don't know how it happened, but I forgot to mention the new Emily Henry, which of course I will read. For the Buzzwordathon we have a prompt with an animal on the cover and an animal in the title. So I'm going to read, of course, Raising Hair, which made it on the shortlist for the non-fiction list. Another one that didn't make it on the shortlist, but I still really want to read, is By the Fire We Carry. I'm going to read The Trumpet Major. I'm probably going to start that tonight as well for the Thomas Hardy read-along. Ooh, and I should say we have picked for the Thomas Hardy read-along our spring reads, which my edition of course is downstairs, but it's Far From the Madding Crowd, which is my favorite Thomas Hardy. So this is going to be my first reread for the Thomas Hardy read-along. If you were not sure if you wanted to join the Thomas Hardy read-along, now is the moment, because if you've not read Thomas Hardy, I would highly recommend reading Far From the Madding Crowd. Early summer we will have a live show for that book, so you have all the time in the world to read it. But I'm really excited to give my favorite Thomas Hardy reread. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. So yes, this is my TBR for April. Not too crazy. Oh, and I think I will also listen to The Dream Hotel by Leila Lelami, which I got the audiobook from because I wasn't sure if it was for me, so I figured I will use the credit on Libro FM for that audiobook, and then these I all have physically. So I'm very excited for April. It's gonna be a very heavy contemporary month. I don't have any classics except for the Trumpet Major, which I think I will read the majority of in March still. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you had fun hanging out with me, and I hope to see you in the next one. Doei!